Before I go on to the next thing, I want to make a point which came up in a comment on the last video. If I make a mark like this, it's already a thing. And if I make another line like this, what do we have? We already have space. This is a figure. It's somewhere in. This is farther back. This is nearer. This is right away. Every mark implies space. This is something near. This is something behind. Here's something in this place. This might be a tree, for instance. This might be a cloud farther away. This might be somebody sitting against a rock here. Whatever. So every mark you make implies space. So that as soon as you make a mark, this first mark I made, there's the implication of all the space. So right away the whole page is activated. And this has to be kept in mind. Everything's going on. Now, I'll make another point about that. When we look at the world, everything that's lower down is nearer to us. And the higher it gets, the farther away it is. So whatever is lower on the page is near, unless, of course, it's something that says that it's near. So here is a thing, and it's planted here. So it's at the same distance as, say, this grass here. And then it remains at this distance because it's one thing. It's like that line that I drew initially. Here's something that's at this distance. It rises up. This point is nearer than the sky here. And this is at the same distance as here. So where an object is planted is very important. And that brings us to an important rule when you're learning to draw the figure. This rule is not, you've got to do this and all, but when you're learning to draw and you're drawing the figure, if you cut the head off, that's not so serious. But if you cut the feet off, it's serious, because that's where the placement in the space is expressed and the weight of the figure is expressed. You want to try to fill the page with the subject. The figure should fill the page. If you're going to make a mistake, if you're going to cut something off, it's the head and not the feet. And that's because of the importance of expressing the space, expressing the volume, and activating the whole space and being conscious of how the whole page is activated. There's space, there's volume everywhere as soon as you make a mark. This can seem like an abstruse, very theoretical consideration, but it's very important. So if you're serious about learning to draw, beat that into your head and make sure that you're always aware of the weight of things, the placement of things, and how every mark is creating space. Now we're going to get into the problem of eye training. This is something that you have to work on. I certainly had to work on it a very long time. It's useful to have a teacher there to remind you and correct you. And if you don't have that, you have to correct yourself, and I'll give you some techniques of how to do that. I've clipped something from an animator's video. Let's just watch this.
My core value in all this force work is that force is the first thing and the most important thing because it really does define the gesture and the function of the pose. Let's see if we can make some magic happen here. So I'm going to reverse the fact that his pelvis is pushing out here and have it push out the other way. I'm going to be really simple and crude. I just want to get the energies down, okay? Again, I'm drawing for ideas. Notice I'm not drawing for perfection. I'm drawing my thoughts. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to set this up to get me to the next place. Right? And let's see if we can get this happening in here now. And I'm going to be, like I said, fast and crude just to get the idea. By the way, I've done this before in figure drawing classes, and I was teaching at some of the colleges in the San Francisco area where I live. I had students go buy animation paper, and we would have the model take poses in 3 steps, like I'm doing today, actually. And that was really awesome. You know, like you started learning that force, you know, came from motion, right? So we had the models go through a movement to better understand what force actually means, you know, so you don't just look at any kind of pose anymore and think that it's only, you know, it's only about that one moment in time, right? That there's more to it than that, right?
Animators and cartoonists still know something about drawing. And this guy is making a point that is crucially important. He talks about forces. The vocabulary I would use would be capturing the character of the pose. In serious figure drawing classes, they always begin with short poses because that's where you are just capturing the essential things about what's going on. You're not worrying about fussing and doing some beautiful, perfect thing. You're worried about training your eye to capture the essence. Now, what is the essence? What is the character of a pose? It has to do with what's going on with the weight and the movement of the figure. That has to be understood, and then it has to be expressed. And to express the character of something, whether it's a figure or a tree, whatever it is, you have to caricature what it is. This is the whole problem with accuracy, because you have to express, and that means you have to emphasize what is important. Exactness doesn't emphasize what's important. If it's long, you make it longer, because if you make it a little shorter than it is, that is going to go against its character, and therefore you won't express what it is. This animator has got the right idea about going for the character of the drawing, and what he's doing, it's a technical thing. He's setting up something to do animation. So I don't want to criticize anything about what he's doing, except that when it comes to true drawing, so to speak, he's doing some things here that you shouldn't do. For instance, he's drawing with his hand a lot. You know, all this fussing and drawing the same line again and again. It's not really taking it anywhere. That's to be avoided. Draw with the mind, as I said in the last video. The other thing is that even though he's got a lot of gesture here, and this may be the gesture he wants because he's using this model, but that's not necessarily exactly what he wants to have in his animation. But if he were doing a figure drawing exercise, there's a couple of mistakes in this drawing. Look at this for a second. and see if you can see these two mistakes that he's made with regard to capturing the character of the pose. His drawing has lots of character. It strongly expresses a certain gesture. But is that gesture the same gesture as the gesture of the pose? Find two important differences. I'll give you 30 seconds. This is the sort of thing you have to do when you're looking at your own drawing and when you're looking at a pose. It's harder to do when you have an actual model because then you've got to translate your three-dimensional experience into 2 dimensions. But here is an initial exercise. All right, I threw in a couple of hints there. There's 2 things. In the pose, the model's left foot is closer to us than his right foot, is nearer. It's lower on the page, it's nearer. And in the drawing, that's not expressed. The other thing is that in the drawing, the head is higher. It's not as thrown back as far as in the case of the model. How should the beginning draftsman proceed in order to get these things right? This takes us back to the last video, because not only do you have to correctly understand the model, what is lower, what is higher, what's more to the right, what's more to the left, what's nearer, what's farther, but that has to be placed correctly into the page. All right, how do you do this? The basic thing that has to be done is that you have to see the model for what it is. And in order to do that, you have to simplify. You've got to find what is essential. And there are many ways to do this, and I'll suggest a few ways. You can find your own way of doing it. But one way is to see the model as a simple shape or as several simple shapes. What do these triangles represent? Well, they represent each foot, its relationship, lower or higher, nearer and farer. The far left point, the upper triangle, represents the 2 hands and their relative positions. Let's look again at the sketch, which shows the figure represented as one simple shape. Now again, this is representing the salient points of the figure as they fit into the page. It's not enough to see the figure correctly, to get the gesture, the character of the figure correctly. It's not enough. It also has to be placed correctly in the page. Correct placement is even the first thing, the primary thing. In fact, all of drawing can be reduced to correctly placing. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that you see what's farthest to the left, what's farthest to the right, what's highest, and what's lowest. Of course, one has to also see what's nearest and what's farthest. And that means representing volumes and shapes in space. I'm not going to get into that in this video. In fact, it's difficult to translate our three-dimensional sensation, our binocular sensation of space, into 2 dimensions. And that can cause some confusion when we're trying to see what's lowest, what's farther to the right, because we're confused by seeing things that are near and far. It can help sometimes to shut one eye. That way you cut off the binocular vision. But we're so used to seeing things in a binocular way that even when we see with one eye, we still have a three-dimensional sensation. So you have to develop a kind of grid in your eye, capacity to see things flat so that you can translate them. That doesn't mean not seeing them spatially. It all has to happen at once, but you have to practice these things one at a time. I want to point out that I prepared these little sketches freehand, just looking at the image of that model. They're not tracings. And the proof of that, if you like, is that I was going for the character of the pose so that I exaggerated slightly the movement so that the foot on the left is farther back compared to the foot on the right, to caricature the movement. I want to point out also that doing that for me is second nature. It comes automatically because I've spent my life concentrating on doing that. And if you're interested in becoming a draftsman, do that too. Concentrate on doing that, on being able to make something like that little diagram instantly. You look at something and that's what you do. You map it out that way. That is the first step. All the rest will flow from that. But if you can't do that, you're going to right away be in a mess. You're not going to place things properly. Work on that. Look at things. You can practice with anything. It doesn't have to be a figure. But practice with three-dimensional objects. A chair, a lamp. It doesn't matter what it is. Looking at an object and seeing its character and mapping that out in 2 dimensions. All right, now let's go one step further. There are any number of ways to approach this problem. The goal is to seize a hold of the character of your subject and place it in the page. It's what I call mastering the subject. Here's another approach that one could take. It may be that you're saying to yourself, this isn't drawing. I don't want to make a stupid little stick figure like this. I want to make beautiful, wonderful drawings like I've seen in the museums and so on. Well, let me tell you, this is 90% of this. If you can't do what I'm talking about here, you can't get to this other stuff, because you can never at once place the figure and make it with beautiful lines. You can do like the classical realists, take 3 days and finally fussing around like ad Nirdrum, fuss, and you finally get these fuzzy thing, and you finally make this sort of thing that looks like a photograph. But you're not going to do anything that has any, that has any real drawing to it, where when you make that one line, It's right where it should be, and it's doing everything. It's expressing volume. It's fitting into the page beautifully. It's doing everything all at once. You've got to start out with this business of being able to simplify the subject and place it in the page. That is the great foundation. And you will find with the further steps, the problem of understanding and representing volume and so on, that also is only a matter of placement. So if you can get that eye training, if you can get that grid in your eye to see what is to the left, what is to the right, then, that's 90% of the game. But so far, I've only talked about the extremities. You also have to do the same thing with the interior of the figure. Let's go back to our little fuzzy out of focus model here. It doesn't matter what you can see in these pictures. It matters what I'm telling you. So not only do you have to see what's highest, what's lowest, what's farthest to the right and what's farthest to the left, you have to see where everything else is in relationship to those things. So, for instance, let's take the crotch. Where is it? Is it to the right of the center of the extreme left and right? Is it to the left? Where is the lower shoulder in relationship to the hips? Is it higher? Is it lower? How much? Is the left shoulder to the right or to the left of the right foot? With a plumb line in your eye, you can see that it's to the right. And so whenever you're going to place that shoulder, you're going to look to see where that foot is. You're going to refer it to everything else. When you place anything, it's always in relationship to other things. Another example. Is his right elbow higher or lower than his left hand? Okay, it's lower. But for every figure, whether it's a human figure, any sort of object, any sort of subject, no matter how multifarious it is, when you are putting something on the page, it's in reference to everything else and to the page itself. This is the great first task of the would-be draftsman. To get to this, you go through this and this. Those are the foundations. I had these things beaten into me for 3 years of high school, thanks to Aaron Kurzen. And it didn't end there, and that wasn't enough. For me, it wasn't enough. So, what can I say? This is 90% of drawing is right there. I'm going to show you other things that'll open up the other doors, but I don't know. Watch this video every day, or I don't know what. Get these things into your head. This is the essence, the foundation. It takes a little more than that, but if you got those things, which seem so mechanical, so distant from our beautiful dream of light and shapes and beautiful stuff. It seems, but that's the thing. Even now, when that's all I do. That's 90% of it. So, all right, there it is.